So hello everyone, my name is Ross O'Chiali. I am an urban planner and sustainability educator by background, and I've recently started a nonprofit called Urban Wilding Hub. So today I want to get into this question of what actually is urban wilding and explain some of the science and the practice behind what that means. And then at the end, I'll tell you a little bit about our work at Urban Wilding Hub and how you might like to be involved. This is the third of this same webinar that I've run, and I'm kind of just running it monthly. So if any of you have been to previous ones, apologies, this will be largely the same. But you know, you might have a chance to join in the discussion or something afterwards. So it's fair to say in the last 10 years, rewilding in rural areas, in sort of large scale landscapes, has very much gone mainstream. And there's now actually millions of square kilometers across the world on pretty much every continent that is actively being rewilded in some way, which is a really positive story in terms of conservation, and is really showing what can happen when we take you know, a proactive approach to actually addressing biodiversity loss and habitat degradation. And when you ask people like Rewilding Britain or some of the real experts who are involved in this large-scale rewilding, if you ask them what the definition is or what they mean by rewilding, they'll come up with something quite similar to what's written here, which is that it is the large-scale restoration of ecosystems to the point where nature is allowed to take care of itself. Rewilding seeks to reinstate natural processes and, where appropriate, missing species, allowing them to shape the landscape and the habitats within. So it's all about actually putting back in the missing puzzle pieces in our landscapes, in our ecosystems, and then humans actually taking a step back and not messing with things too much and just letting nature lead the way. And there's actually really good, at this point, science and guidance and guidelines, as well as some, you know, popular writing on what rewilding is. So we kind of have a very good idea, actually, of what this means, what it's trying to achieve. And there's been lots of projects, and I'm sure you're aware of many of them, that are showing, you know, really great success. But more recently, really in the last 2-3 years, the word rewilding has started to be applied within towns and cities, within the urban environment. It's something that some people say it can't be done because cities are too altered, the spaces that we're trying to rewild are too small, but actually people have been applying these rewilding principles and a rewilding philosophy in projects in cities, and we're going to talk about a few of those in the presentation today. So I just want to highlight the fact that urban rewilding and applying these principles in urban settings is like a very new thing. It's a very young field, and there's actually no widely agreed definition for what it means. People are using the term in different ways. And one of the jobs of the Urban Wilding Hub is we're trying to kind of be a voice for sort of bringing people together and kind of focusing in and answering these questions of what do we mean when we're talking about rewilding in cities. But I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation. Now, already you might be thinking, okay, well, what's the difference between rewilding and wilding? So I've obviously called the organization the Urban Wilding Hub. And that's really just a kind of a personal thing, which is that when, in my experience, when people hear the term rewilding, they think it means returning to the past. So returning to a past state before humans had sort of heavily managed or interfered with landscapes, and that's the goal. Now, sometimes that is the goal of rewilding, but not always. And particularly when we're looking in urban areas or highly altered areas, what's actually much more practical is to actually look to the future and think about what can future wild states be, what kind of wild nature could thrive in this space that might be different to how things were in the past. And that's very, very kind of accurate when we're looking at the urban landscape. So I prefer to just drop the re prefix and call it wilding. If you prefer calling it something else, that's absolutely fine. I'm not the grammar police. I'm going to talk a little bit about some kind of theory and principles, and then we're going to get straight into talking about case studies and some nice images and actually showing you on the ground what this looks like. So bear with me if you have trouble sort of thinking in words. These are some wordy slides coming up, but then we'll get into some really nice case studies in a moment. So we're trying to put together our definition of what we mean by urban wilding. And for us, urban wilding is an approach to stewarding urban nature in a way that restores ecological processes and promotes healthy ecosystems with minimal human control. So it's not about abandoning spaces. It's not about having no human interaction. In cities, humans will always be part of what's going on and will always have some activity or some involvement, but it's about actually just reducing the amount of control that we have over nature in cities so that actually ecological processes can come back and start to flourish on their own terms. But importantly, there's a really important human element to this as well, which is that it's about promoting biodiversity. It's also about climate resilience and about community well-being and people's health. And that contact with wild nature on a daily basis is really important for that. And helping people actually to live alongside wildlife again and to coexist with wildlife. Now, I've mentioned the term natural processes or ecological processes a few times, and this is really the core of what rewilding is about and what makes it kind of unique as an approach to managing landscapes and managing nature, is that rewilding is about restoring three key ecological processes. These come from a sort of seminal paper by Perino et al., which you can find online. I think it's open access. And these ecological processes are about restoring, one, the dispersal of animals and plants, so making it easier for animals and seeds to move across the landscape, removing barriers and facilitating that sort of movement so that they can move into new areas, have more genetic diversity, and you know, avoid the risk of local extinction and that kind of thing. The second one is about completing food webs that have been kind of torn apart or have been disturbed over the years. So we have, you know, removed a lot of animals from the food web through hunting or through selective, you know, kind of spraying of herbicides and things like that. So we do a lot to kind of remove animals and plants and different species from their sort of natural setting. And so rewilding is about putting that back together. And this is where species reintroductions can be a really powerful tool. And then finally, it's about this idea of restoring natural disturbance. So I think sometimes we think of disturbance in natural spaces as being only a negative thing, like everything should just stay kind of static and balanced. But actually, you know, when you monitor healthy ecosystems over long time periods, what you find is that there's always some level of disturbance going on, and that keeps everything quite in a refresh, in a state of kind of dynamism. And actually what we don't want is to be managing landscapes in a way that they never change. That's not really part of the sort of natural ecological cycle. And so, you know, allowing large animals onto the land where they disturb the soil, where they disturb trees, allowing trees to fall over and to create that kind of disturbance is all part of actually I don't want to say the circle of life from The Lion King, but it essentially is about the circle of life and about allowing natural processes to kind of flow and for nature to do its thing. And that creates microhabitats and all this kind of thing as well. So bear that in mind when you hear people talking about ecological processes or natural processes. This is really kind of the core of what rewilding is about. And then the final part is I want to kind of address something that I think sometimes people struggle with, which is that they say, well, if we can't achieve wilderness within cities, which we probably can't, then it's not really rewilding. You know, it must be something else. But for me, urban wilding is about making progress towards wilder spaces. It's not about achieving perfection. And so I've kind of devised this visual which helps me kind of think about this process. So if we think about on the bottom left of this graph, so we have our fully urbanized streets and spaces, places where there's very little or zero ecological processes playing out, zero biodiversity, and they're fully human-dominated spaces. Quite close alongside this is our typical sort of urban parks and gardens and typical urban landscapes, which have a little bit of biodiversity, a little bit of wildlife, but it's very heavily managed in a kind of static state. And what we want to be doing is just moving these spaces in a wilding process towards being natural habitats, semi-natural habitats, and eventually semi-wild landscapes where water can move freely, where animals can move freely in and out, and where the landscape is changing on sort of natural rhythms, and we're not interfering with it too much. Now, there's a bit of work, obviously, to move spaces towards that, and there'll be, you know, different possibilities for different types of spaces. But that is something that I find quite useful to think about, is about making progress along this sort of continuum towards making spaces wilder than they already are. Okay, so let's see, we have the sort of theory in mind. Let's think about what this actually looks like in practice, because there are some really fantastic projects, and I'm really just scratching the surface with these next couple of slides. There's two main approaches to rewilding that we can think about, which is a passive approach to wilding, which I call less is more, and a more active approach to wilding, which I'll talk about in a moment. So in the passive approach, it's really about literally doing less, stepping back from management and just allowing vegetation to grow, allowing wildlife to come back on its own terms, and seeing what happens. A very easy example of this, and something that can be done in many, many places, and you've probably seen in your local city, is public parks setting aside spaces of grass to just grow and to be mown less often, and to reduce pesticide use or stop using pesticides or any sort of controlling mechanism on the vegetation. And then they just let it grow and they see what happens. So one example is in Milan, Italy, where they've set aside these long grass areas in 111 parks. It's 1.7 square kilometers of cumulative area, so quite impactful, even if some of the patches are quite small. And what they found 1 year on from the first trial, they did scientific study of this, an ecological survey, and they found that in all of these long grass areas, the diversity and the abundance of invertebrates, these are things like butterflies and bees and wasps and beetles and grasshoppers, had all increased in a very quick time scale. And it also saved money, because they were using lawnmowers less, paying staff time less for maintenance, so reduce costs and reduce emissions associated with that. This is like a total no-brainer, easy way into an urban wilding approach that can help to also win support from local people or decision makers who are maybe skeptical of this as an idea. If we actually observe spaces and allow them to passively wild over a longer time scale, we also see really, really interesting things. So this is an example in East London, Bethnal Green Nature Reserve, and this was a very small site. It was a bomb site in World War II, so it was completely cleared. For whatever reason, it was never rebuilt or redeveloped, and it was fenced off, and it was allowed to develop through this process of ecological succession into what is now, decades later, a fantastically diverse and healthy native woodland. Largely native, although they do have some exotic species in there as well, and that's a whole other interesting part of doing this in urban areas. You get lots of exotic species in the mix as well. So this is managed very lightly by volunteers. They just create paths. They do some ecological interventions, like they've put in a pond, which has been a big success in terms of biodiversity, but they largely don't try and control what's happening too much. So a really, really nice sort of lightweight approach to a space that's been allowed to passively wild over a long time scale. And this is such an important asset for the community as well as urban biodiversity. Now, the active approach, the more hands-on and sort of getting stuck in approach, has been described as a marathon with a sprint start. So this idea that these are long-term projects where you want to let nature do its thing, but that you do a lot of work at the beginning, which is the sprint start before the marathon, to kind of put back in missing species, establish habitats, or renaturalize waterways, so that actually you're putting things back into good shape so that sort of nature can lead from there. Really interesting stuff happening in Paris. Now, they're not calling this rewilding or wilding, but I think it's interesting examples to bring up, because they're doing some of the most ambitious, I suppose you could say, urban greening projects, but actually in some cases making an effort to establish real habitats as well, which is starting to fall into kind of the wilding approach. This is Place de la Catalone, which, as you can see on the left, was a fully asphalt and concrete roundabout and roadway, and they've totally transformed the space into a kind of urban woodland. So lots of investment, several million euros have gone into this. This is a big project, a big sprint start, and it'll be interesting to see how this is allowed to develop and whether they're doing a lot of maintenance on this going forward. But I think taking inspiration from these kind of projects, I think a lot of cities could benefit from this sort of depaving and establishing natural habitats approach. We could also look towards Germany. So this is the River Isar in Munich. A very similar story to a lot of cities in that it was a city built on a river. Rivers tend to flood, which is a problem if you have a lot of people living along it in a dense, a dense way. And so they did what engineers of the 19th century like to do, which is that they put it all into concrete channels. That worked for a while, but then they got even worse floods once the water kind of topped over the banks. And so over a process of many decades, the city and the residents and many stakeholders actually set about renaturalizing this stretch of the River Isar. And that's the picture that you see on the right, which was done in the 1990s. And it's been widened, it's been reintegrated with its floodplain. The water quality now is much better. Biodiversity has bounced back. Beavers have moved into the river of their own, their own free will from the surrounding countryside, and people can actually swim in it, picnic, cycle alongside it. So an incredible example of a really big, intensive project that will, provide benefits, I suppose, for generations to come. But actually, you can do this on much smaller scales as well. So I could have also included the London Borough of Enfield in North London, who are doing river restoration on much smaller scales. And I might have a picture of that in here somewhere as well. But let's talk a little bit more about London, because London is a real front-runner city, pioneering city when it comes to urban wilding. For several years, the Mayor of London has had the Rewild London Fund, which is where the Mayor's office is directly giving money to rewilding and restoration projects. And it's become what I like to call the capital city of rodent reintroductions, because there's been several really good projects where native rodents, which are declining or absent, have been reintroduced to parts of the capital city of London and have had really good effects. So there's 2 different beaver reintroduction projects, soon to be 3, maybe 4. So they keep wanting to do more of them now because they've been so successful within London's urban area. And this picture here on the right, top right, you can see is the location of that beaver reintroduction in West London, which has like a McDonald's near it and an industrial estate and a residential neighborhood with a metro stop. So very urban location, and the beavers are doing really well, and they are creating a wetland ecosystem there. They're reducing flooding in the surrounding area. It's been a huge success. But slightly less, I suppose, flashy kind of reintroductions also include harvest mice reintroductions to meadows, urban meadows, which have allowed owls to nest in the area because now they can feed on the harvest mice. So that's what I mean by knitting back together those food chains that have been disrupted. And in the middle here, we have a picture of a water vole. So South London on a river course, they've reintroduced quite a few water voles, which is kind of an aquatic rodent like the beaver, along this water course, and they seem to be doing really well. And they will also be sort of helping with seed dispersal and all these kind of knitting back together these ecological processes as well. So we could talk about each of these for hours, I'm sure, but just to flag those up to you as being we're really proving that you can do reintroductions within cities. They can be successful and they can coexist alongside urban communities and create a lot of benefits. And then we can go up the other scale, which is now looking at peri-urban. So I think this is a relatively untapped, kind of under-discussed potential for rewilding, which is actually doing it on the edge of cities or very close to urban areas. This is a national park in the Netherlands. I never learned how to pronounce it, so I won't try and say what the name of it is, but you can see it written there. So quite a large sort of rural national park, but as you can see from the map here, it's surrounded on 3 sides by urban areas, by the city of Haarlem and by a few other sort of neighborhoods, and then it has the North Sea on the other side. So there's access for people, there's walking paths through, and within that you have these free roaming herbivores, native herbivores that have been reintroduced in a classic rewilding approach to manage that landscape. So you have European bison, you have, which were almost extinct a couple of decades ago. You have ponies, which are related to the extinct kind of ancestor of modern ponies. And you have Highland cattle, which again are kind of related to the extinct aurochs, which is the ancestor to domesticated cattle breeds. So you have these large herbivores, almost in a savanna-like kind of sphere, coexisting alongside people. And I think this kind of peri-urban green belt rewilding has huge potential that we should be doing more of. Alrighty, so that is your sort of roundup of case studies. I'll try to sort of whiz through this last section because I do tend to ramble on a bit. You can tell I really enjoy talking about this topic. And really just kind of finish up by saying kind of what is urban wilding, but also what isn't it? Because I think there's a risk that we try and call everything wilding because it's kind of a trendy term and it's a great marketing term and it gets people excited. But I think when we do that, we sort of lose the value in it and we lose the power in it. So let's try and just be specific about what we're talking about with this. So for me, urban wilding is about making places wilder. It's not just a rebrand of urban greening. And I think sort of urban greening, green infrastructure has been a fantastic kind of framework for bringing more nature into cities, but it has sometimes been applied in a way that is kind of ecologically, I suppose, has less of an ecological understanding. Whereas urban wilding is all about wild spaces, natural habitats, and really putting the ecological knowledge first and foremost, and actually moving away from the traditional highly designed and managed landscape designs that we've known for so long. Urban wilding is about reducing human control. Here's a good example of London Fields, a park in London where they fenced off part of the park to naturally regenerate. And as you can see, it's got, you know, this huge abundance of vegetation growing within the fence. And then outside the fence, where they're managing it as like a traditional urban park, you can see it's just a monoculture of grass. So reducing human control is a fantastic step towards, you know, bringing in more abundance, more biodiversity. But it's not the same thing as just abandoning sites without any sort of oversight or management. And so, you know, abandoned sites, brownfield sites can have really interesting ecology on them, and we should sort of value that and protect it. But they can also often have antisocial behavior. They might have rubbish, broken glass, syringes, who knows? So these aren't necessarily like, this isn't a safe way to sort of manage urban spaces. So it's finding that middle ground where we're actually letting nature regenerate on its own terms, but we're doing enough management and enough sort of human involvement and community involvement so the places are still safe and accessible and functional for people as well. As we've seen, urban wilding is sometimes about reintroducing appropriate animals, but it's not about releasing dangerous animals into the city. So this is an example from of a cattle breed called the Tauros, which is used and has been used in some rural rewilding projects because its behavior is quite similar to the extinct aurochs, as I mentioned earlier. But it doesn't play well with people. It doesn't like dogs, and its behavior can be quite aggressive. So it's simple things like this of simply knowing which animals would actually be appropriate to coexist alongside people, which ones are kind of safe enough or friendly enough to people that we could happily have them in an urban park or a peri-urban site, and which ones are best left to sort of deeper rural areas or true wilderness. What we also want to avoid, and what is a challenge in many parts of mainland Europe, as biodiversity has been bouncing back there over the last couple of years, is actually what happens when we have wild animals simply roaming the streets. And so this is an example in Italy. Several cities have problems with wild boar coming into urban areas because they're attracted by rubbish, and you know, they can get access to food in that way. But, you know, is this creating risks? Is this actually healthy for the boar? Probably not. Is it creating risks for residents? Possibly yes. And it has created quite a tense atmosphere around this. So really think about how do we coexist and how do we manage where actually wildlife and human habitation doesn't mix very well, and having protocols in place to manage that as we recover nature on a broader scale. That's really important. So sometimes it's about reintroducing animals, but sometimes you can't actually bring back the missing animals. So there are ways of us as human beings mimicking animal behavior, if that's not possible. Some of this looks like traditional land management, like scything instead of mowing the grass, which would probably you know, be better for the land, has less emissions. Something like tree ring barking is has been done in forests to actually bring in more diversity to forests. Although someone during the last webinar told me this would probably be a terrible idea in urban areas. So I'm still sort of learning about where these are safe to apply and where you wouldn't use them. So take that with a grain of salt. We can construct artificial beaver dams if we can't bring back beavers. If we can't bring back the actual beavers, we can go in with volunteers or with teams and actually build fake beaver dams, which can do a lot of good as well. And then we can also look at seasonal or short-term grazing. So this is Cambridge in England, and something that they've been doing, going back to the sort of era of common areas and sort of peasants that would bring in their livestock into the central common, which is now public park, for certain parts of the year to graze their animals. And they still do this. So local farmers are able to bring in their cows to graze, and this is sort of mimicking, on a temporary scale at least, the movement of wild herbivores across the landscape. Really important to sort of almost finish here. I think I have 2 slides left on this part, is really to say that urban wilding has to be done with communities for it to be successful. So I've really focused in this presentation on kind of the ecological and the biodiversity sides of urban wilding, but actually engaging positively with communities, co-creating projects with communities is absolutely essential for them to be successful, for them to be long-lasting. And any of you who are urban planners or architects or involved in the built environment in some way will know this very, very well. People don't like things being done to them or in their neighborhood without them being involved in it. So urban wilding, whether it's a local park or even a private site, is a great opportunity to actually build connections with local communities, offer opportunities for them to connect with the natural world, and actually help people see that there's a different way of sort of managing our landscapes, managing nature within cities, and we can have so much more biodiversity and abundance than we are used to having. Urban wilding shouldn't be done to communities, and we've also seen some examples of where maybe not enough consultation has happened or not enough involvement has happened, and there's actually been a backlash to rewilding. And this varies so much from place to place. Some people are really for wilding, some people are naturally very against it. And so bringing people along in that process rather than just dropping it on them without warning is really, really important. This is an interesting article from The Guardian if you want to read it. And then the final thing about climate resilience, which I think is kind of really central to this whole thing of why would we bother doing rewilding within cities? And for me, it's about the fact that we're now entering into a new climate era where we're having more heat waves, more flooding, more storms, and that actually our highly designed, highly managed landscapes can't really cope with that. They're just not very resilient to these kind of swings in weather and these extreme weather events. So this is just a little bit of, my little bit of data. One summer day last June, I went out to 3 local green spaces around me. I live in Milan, Italy, by the way. And we had a month of really hot weather and no rainfall. And what I found was that the traditional urban park on the left was really struggling. So the soil was a hard pan, it was totally baked, all the grass had died, and there was no moisture there. And so it wasn't cooling the air. And if it rained, it would just flow off that and cause surface flooding issues. So that wasn't very resilient. But then I went to an urban woodland, and that was still absolutely thriving. And there was birdsong, and there was insects flying about, and it still, at least to a cursory glance, looked like it was still functioning and healthy. And same thing with this wildflower meadow on the right. Everything was blooming. There was a lot of insect pollinator activity. And it really highlighted for me that actually if we have diversity, if we have natural habitats, and if we stop trying to control everything, we actually build in more climate resilience. And then we as urban residents get the benefit of that as well. And that will help to buffer us against the extremes of climate change. Whew, okay. So that's the end of the sort of educational portion of the webinar. I just want to take a moment to tell you a bit about Urban Wilding Hub. So we're a new organization that I started back in October, and I now have a couple of collaborators working on this with me, and we'll soon be looking at getting registered formally as a nonprofit. And really what we're trying to do is to fill a gap that we discovered. So for the sort of large scale rewilding rural rewilding, there are really, really great organizations that are helping to like drive that forward, to advocate for rewilding, to provide funding to local projects. These are the likes of Rewilding Europe and Rewilding Britain, as well as various country level rewilding organizations. But so far, there's no group or organization that is focusing solely on urban wilding. And this is a totally kind of, because it's so new and because many of the traditional rewilding organizations don't want to kind of deal with cities, they want to deal with the large rural landscapes, this has kind of fallen through the cracks. And so what we're trying to do is kind of build up a movement to actually accelerate the adoption of rewilding principles in cities as a mainstream approach. So we wanted to go from these pioneering projects that are happening across Europe, learn from those, and actually start to see it happening in every town and city across the continent. So yeah, as I mentioned, urban wilding is already happening, but it's largely happening in isolated pockets. A lot of the people running the projects don't know each other. A lot of the learnings are not being shared more widely than sort of local groups who are delivering these. And so if we want to scale this up and make it mainstream, we need to start bringing people together, work together to share knowledge and to get more successful projects happening, but also to sort of change the narrative around urban nature and what we can what urban nature can actually be, and that we might actually want to embrace wild nature more in cities. So the way we're doing this at the moment is that we are bringing together a community of urban wilders to share knowledge so that we can get that knowledge out there and have more successful projects happening. We'll also look into creating guidance or to creating resources so people can kind of hit the ground running. They don't have to reinvent the wheel and they want to do their own local project, and advocating for change more broadly and sort of trying to tell positive stories and share case studies. So our main program that we're working on now is called Wilding Partners, and this is a community that anyone can join who is either involved in urban wilding or who wants to be involved. So in there we have people who are very experienced, who have been leading some of the projects that I've presented today, but we also have people who are kind of part of a local community group and they want to be doing wilding in their local area, but they're not sure how to start. We also have some researchers, some local authority officers. So a really nice mixed group. And we now have over 40 people in that community so far, which is great. And we're running monthly partner meetings where we're having some presentations, we're having knowledge sharing and discussion, and then we're sort of figuring out what we need to do next to support people more to do that good work on the local level. We're also crowdsourcing a map of urban wilding projects across Europe. So this has been sort of kind of slow to get going. There's only a few projects on there so far, but if any of you are involved in a local urban wilding project, I'd encourage you to head over there. I'll share a link with you after the presentation, and you can add your own project on there, fill in some details. It takes about 1 or 2 minutes, and it would be really, really great to actually understand what's the scale of this across Europe, because we still don't really know. No one has sort of toss it up how many urban wilding projects are actually happening across Europe. What we're finding is that there's loads happening in London, which I kind of knew already, and that we haven't really been able to break through to places like Germany or France or places like or Netherlands, where we know there is stuff happening, but we're just trying to build our network and sort of get people involved. And then the final thing we've managed to do in the last kind of short few months, and this is largely due to the fantastic volunteers that we have, is we built up a knowledge hub, which is in this sort of table that is on our website that anyone can go and access. And it has links to research papers, articles, podcasts, videos, reports about urban wilding. And so we're trying to bring all that knowledge that is out there on the web into one place, so it's really easy for people to access. So again, I'll send you a link to that after this, and we would love if you went and checked it out and hopefully found some interesting stuff that you can learn from there. Cool. So, we've got to put these out of order. We get it all up on the screen. So there's really 3 ways to get involved if you would like to. One is that if you're involved or you'd like to be involved in urban wilding, apply to become a wilding partner. It's very easy. You just fill out a quick form. You can add your project to the projects map. Whatever sort of role you're in, wherever you're working, see if you can be in a position to actually advocate for urban wilding. Maybe you're working for a local authority. Maybe you're just a local resident who can talk to their, local councillors or local elected officials to actually try and move this forward. And then the final thing is, if you have the financial means, we are looking for corporate partners who may be able to help us fund some of our projects, but also one-off and monthly donations are very, very welcome. At the moment, we're running all this on a voluntary basis, but we do have we do have bills to pay in terms of website hosting and all that kind of stuff as well. And once we can sort of build up the funds to put more time into this, we'll really start to make really, really great progress on all of our programs. Fantastic. Okay, well,